We're just about to take it up Table Mountain. Hello YouTubers, and welcome to part 2 of the review on the Cannondale Scalpel 26-inch bike. Now in this review, this is where I took it onto the mountain with my buddies with a couple of other bikes. We're going to have some camera footage. I'm going to talk about my feelings on the bike and then some of the feedback in terms of the ride, because we switched bikes and I managed to ride a 29'er for the first time. So I'm going to give a bit of feedback in terms of a 29'er versus a 26'er, and then items like the pro pedal lever on this bike and how well that works. So first of all, as you'll see from the footage, there are a few of us which went off on the mountain together. There was myself, my good friend Dean, who rode a specialized carbon bike, weighs about between 10.5 and 11 kilograms. There was Rouan, who was riding at the time, he was riding the 29'er. It was a Silverback, very heavy 29'er, probably one of the first ones. It felt like a horse getting onto it. And that weighed anything between 13 and 14 kilograms. There were then 2 other gents that joined us as well. But we basically had the same cleat, so we could change in between bikes, because my fitness is not where it should be at the moment. They've just completed the Cape Epic, and we're going to give a far better objective view in terms of the performance of this bike, its weight, the suspension and what have you. Right, so let me just start off by saying, in terms of a bike that I'd initially be drawn to, as I stated in the first part of the review, probably my most favorite bike to date is a Santa Cruz Superlight. And just looking at the bike and that geometry and the single pivot, I'm really drawn to it. So I was a little bit concerned whether this bike would work or not for me, particularly because the rear suspension only has 80 mils of travel. But I can tell you, brush that all aside, the weight, the suspension and everything, the lefty fork works like a dream. There was, however, one thing which did let me down on the ride, which I was expecting to happen, and that was the tires. Now the bike originally came with these Schwalbe tires, they're 2.1s with tubes, and I was fully aware that on our ride, because it's a very technical ride on loose descents and what have you, that the pressures that I was hoping to put in these, about 1.6, 1.7 bar, would be risky, and it was. I had flats on both the back and the front.
I'll tell you now, when I landed the back.
Is it too low for him?
Yeah.
Because it was very low for me.
Very low for me as well.
For you? Don't feel like that. No, it's no stable.
How's the sailing ship going on?
Is this thing tight on my head? It's wobbling around. Okay, so Martin's on his second tube now, possibly because the tube I gave him has got a hole in it, I'm not sure.
After that ride, what I did do was I did change to the Geax Saguaro tires. These are 2.2s. Now initially I mentioned that I was a fan of the Maxxis LUST, but both my mates who have just recently completed the Cape Epic swear by these, and I know these are very popular now, and it has to be said, going tubeless and these types of tires is definitely a plus, especially for that kind of terrain. You can ride lower pressures with very minimal risk of pinch flats. these side walls are far thicker and work far better than something like these, which potentially are very thin and can puncture very easily if you ride low pressures. Right, so in terms of performance, I'm going to show you a little clip where we've got one steep technical little climb, and both Dean and Rouan actually took the bike up and down.
The weight difference between that big 29'er
And that?
and this thing. I mean, it's just the acceleration and that. Yeah, it's so much easier. Look, and that's a weight thing. It's because it's lighter.
Yeah, that's what people have said. Now, as you can see from that little clip, they both really went to the bike, climbed very nicely. It had enough traction, although it was on the kind of the tubes, but the tire and tube combination, but the pressures were low. Obviously, that would be the undoing later on when we went down over some more technical, rougher terrain where it obviously got a pinch flat. It hit the rim and got a pinch flat. But nonetheless, they said they were really impressed with the weight and its ability to climb and the suspension coming down. Now, the one thing also to note, which I have not had a set of brakes that work as well as these Magura Martas for a long time. And the actual rotors on the front of the disc are the smaller rotors, and that still didn't inhibit them at all. On my previous bike, the Morwood Zula, I have bigger rotors on the front, and these work better than those did. Right, so here in this next little clip, I'm going to show you where we've got a steady incline, which is a long kind of climb over reasonably rough terrain. And here was the one area where I jumped onto, we switched between bikes. I at one point was on the 29'er, which felt like a big horse. And then we switched on this, and there in particular, I could note the advantage of the lightweight of this bike. And on my previous bike, I had a similar float RP23 rear shock, and it had the same pro pedal switch, which is on this bike over here. And on that bike, my Morwood Zula, it was a heavier bike, so I never really felt the advantage of using this pro pedal switch. However, when I flicked over the switch into the pro pedal mode, I certainly noticed that the bike, there was obviously less bob in the back, and any energy that you put into the pedals was transferred into forward motion. It certainly made a difference. Now, this switch, for those of you who don't know it, obviously you can flick it back and forth so you get your full travel, or it stiffens up so that you don't lose energy in the rear suspension. And then this little switch under here can be set to how hard you want it, but this cannot be set on the fly. You need to set it with the bike in a static position. You can set either 1, 2, or 3, 3 being the hardest, 1 being the softest, and then that sets the level of the pro pedal when you have it in the pro pedal position.
A lot of channels doing that. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, you're right. More difficult than the 29'er? Yeah. Well, you're making it look like easy work if I look at you and Martin next to each other.
Right, so now that we had a chance to kind of ride these together, and I had my opportunity to ride on a 29'er, how do I feel about a 29'er? Now, ourselves as being 3 avid mountain bikers always have this debate, particularly in the pub after we've had a good ride. We'll share a beer, and we often come to the debate of, well, is there much advantage to a 29'er, or is it all just marketing hype? Now, that 29'er on the ride weighed, as I said, it was certainly on the heavy side. It was at least 13 kilograms, but I certainly found that getting onto that bike on that gentle ascent climb over reasonably rocky terrain, that it certainly seemed to roll better. Even though I'm unfit, I was pedaling along, and in this next clip I'll just show you, I was actually alongside Dean, my good cycling buddy. He is very fit and strong at the moment, and I started accelerating on the bike with him next to me on his carbon 26-inch bike.
Yeah, I think downhill also, I remember the time I had the 29'er. Just slide. But again, it was the weight as well, I think.
I, for a little while, was able to accelerate quite easily because on the 29'er you don't have to concentrate too much on your line, whereas on a 26-inch bike you're probably picking out your right line so that you kind of trying to miss any real big stones in the way. On the 29'er you can relax a little more about that and just plow on ahead. And because on a 26-inch you're probably moving your steering to avoid the stones, you actually probably put in more energy doing that. However, on the 29'er, obviously because you've got more mass that you're rotating round, there is more energy going into spinning up that wheel. But as I said, if you're not having to pick your line too roughly and getting over the terrain smoother, that might compensate. I will note, and I'll show you now in a clip where I went downhill on the 29'er and we were spinning down.
Make sure my cleat's in properly this time. Take it away. Mind those tyres, eh?
Again, it feels smoother, and probably for a novice it feels easier because you've got this bigger wheel going over the terrain. But because you've got more inertia in that bigger wheel, you certainly don't have as much maneuverability. The 26-inch bike feels far more flickable, far more maneuverable. And certainly, although we didn't try it on tight single track, that's what people say. Certainly on tight single track, your 26-inch wheel has far more of an advantage. So here's where probably I'm going to start in terms of the reading that I've seen. I would probably say then that your 650B or your so-called 27.5-inch wheel is probably a nice compromise. So in time to come, that's what I hope to do, is to perhaps either fit this bike with a 650B or get a 650B specific bike so that I can make that judgment and comparison for myself. Now then, how about the 29-inch version of the Scalpel? As it so happened, I went for one more ride by myself a couple of days ago, and on that ride I came up against two guys on two lightweight bikes, again going up that gentle ascent. The one of them happened to be on a 29-inch Scalpel 1, and I, looking at the bike, couldn't immediately tell that was a 29-inch, and to me that was probably a good thing because the 29-inch ride that I had ridden felt like a big horse. The geometry just felt out. Whereas the 29-inch Cannondale certainly seems they kind of fit the geometry in with the wheels, so it doesn't seem like you're sitting too high, and it certainly seems to sit in quite nicely. I spoke to the gent, he said he was very happy with it. He reckoned his bike weighed about 10.1, 10.2 kilograms, which for a 29'er is really light. I know often when you ask cyclists how much their bike weighs, I think they often underestimate by 200 to 300 grams. I reckon now this bike, it was about 9.7 with the current wheels and slime in it. I reckon it's probably more around 9.8, 9.9. But certainly to have a 29 inch under 10 or just over 10 kilograms would be a big plus.
Whoa.
26'er though.
Oh yeah.
There, and I went right.
Yeah, I think left's the line. I don't know. I mean, I was trying to go left, but just I ran out.
I think you need to go, but there's no loose stuff in the middle where I went. And then I went left,
Yeah.
with the next one, and also got stuck because it's quite slanted and loose, and you slip.
Yeah, you slip
It's
up.
almost better in the middle.
Ah, mother. I will. When I get to your place, I will at least send you a message just to say.
Sorry, this tweet. There's some editing to do here, Martin. You've got some editing to do.
Yeah, I think you're struggling to get them in. You just need another shim.
I need a shim, you're right.
It's just a question of you're not getting them in. Eh?
Yes. I've been a bit stingy with the shims.
That's your usual problem, isn't it? You just can't get it in. Talking of which, after people start working.
So to wrap it up, certainly this bike for me is a keeper. I did get it at a very good price and I wasn't sure whether it would be the right bike for me, and I was prepared to sell it again if it didn't work. I can certainly say for the weight and the way the suspension works, it is a keeper. Now, if you are interested in more bike reviews like this, certainly do let me know by posting a comment and giving the videos a thumbs up, because I'll be going to the States and I'll be certainly trying to get my hands on a few other bikes for review if you're interested. I'll end off this video by just finishing off with a bit more of the video on Table Mountain, as I'm having to say goodbye to it, because I say I'll be tipping off to the States, and that is going to be one of my last rides on Table Mountain for probably quite a few years to come. But anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you soon for the next one. Cheers.
And I didn't go much slower.
No. No tubes in it.
Good.